I met Hunter Braithwaite only recently, last October, when he invited me to be the Miami Rails Fall 2014 visiting writer. When I arrived at the airport, Hunter was there to pick me up, and he basically looked after me for the next 3 days in Miami, driving me around from one art space and bar to another, and giving me a real feel for the place. The whole thing started off very well that first night when he took me to my hotel, the Vagabond, in Miami, where we were greeted by 3 delightful women named May, Bee, and Billy, who immediately made me one of the best gin and tonics I've ever tasted, and accepted me as if into their own home for the duration of my stay. They made this seem like it was just a normal way of doing things in Miami, but I don't think this is really the case. Maybe Memphis, maybe, but as it turned out, I was getting in on the last of Hunter in Miami, since he was already in the process of moving to Memphis. So I kind of got to see Miami in Hunter's rearview mirror, which turned out to be quite a revealing perspective. I hope you've all had a chance to look over the 2-year run of Hunter's Miami Rail, since he did an extraordinary thing with it over that time as editor. Before that, he lived in Shanghai, where he freelanced for a number of publications, including Artinfo, the Wall Street Journal, and Artforum.com. In 2011, he relocated to Miami, writing about contemporary art for everyone from Ocean Drive to the Paris Review. He's also written for Art in America, Brooklyn Rail, and Modern Painters. And I, for one, am really looking forward to his extended meditation on J.G. Ballard in Miami. Please welcome Hunter Braithwaite.
Thank you all for coming out. I mean, it's a freezing afternoon, or maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm still my blood is coagulating again back to a human level after being in Miami for several years. Levi and Nat, everyone at SVA, thank you so much. My name's Hunter Braithwaite. I'm going to talk a little bit about how one sort of weasels their way into art writing for money. I'm going to talk about launching a publication in one of the world's most interesting cities, a city that perversely had no form of critical response, a local critical response before we came along in 2012, which is just insane. Here you have the logo, which we shamelessly ripped off from the Brooklyn Rail. I'm sure you're probably going to see a similarity between our publication and the one from across the river. And then you notice the talk title, How to Run an Art Publication from the Ground Up and Not Into the Ground, and that pesky asterisk, which I will explain with the next slide. Before I do, though, the image is, these 2 images are taken 5 years apart. It's just the Miami Beach, the South Beach, an aerial view. It seems as if the tide is coming in and going out, but that's not the case. The one on the left was photographed, I think, in '79, and the one on the right was photographed in '84. What we see here is this 5-year-long, $64 million Army Corps of Engineers project. It's called Beach Nourishment. Basically, the beach had just eroded, and so someone had to come in and restore it to its former glory. It was great. It generated a lot of money for the economy. It made South Beach what it is today. Also devastated the seabed, so it just sort of, it's a symbol I kind of want everyone to keep in mind. Let me jump. And we're going to do this super, super informally. Can anybody hear me? Or everybody hear me okay? And everything's good? All right. So running it. I'm standing before you as the sort of ambassador of the Miami Rail, but I am in no way, shape, or form responsible for it. It's me plus any number of people who I've worked with over the years. Graphic designers, publishers, people who are selling ads, interns who are lugging boxes around, other people who are lugging boxes around, readers, writers, everybody. This is a photograph that was taken at a planning meeting held in the now defunct Lester's Cafe in Miami's Wynwood district. And you see going around the table poets, writers, curators, graphic designers. The woman at the end is in charge of there was like cultural affairs for the Everglades, which is a thing. A grant writer, artist, a man who runs a movable library, and also a writer. And these are just a handful of the people that did this. So while I'm going to sort of represent them for a few minutes up at this podium, like it's not just my thing. Yeah, who's been to Miami? Okay, during Basel. Who's been to Miami in a contemporary art context in the months between January and November? All right, some hands, but the hands are going down more and more and more. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, me, as to how I got into this. Just some dumb shit that doesn't bear repeating. I left school. I left an undergraduate education for a semester as a senior. I was planning to go work in a marina on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and I would write masculine stories about working in a marina on the Gulf Coast of Florida, and it was going to... Obviously, thankfully, that didn't happen. I somehow scored an internship at National Geographic in the travel books section, just editing and writing blurbs and sort of combing every publication for plagiarism, which there was a lot of. So I was really sort of lucky to cut my teeth on that. Went back to school, finished, bounced to Berlin really quickly. I moved to Berlin in January, which isn't the best time to go, especially when you don't have a visa. And so that move lasted like 3 weeks. And I returned to the United States. And then a friend was like, hey, why don't you try China? It's a little bit more interesting. It hasn't really been done yet. Don't do Beijing, though, do Shanghai. And that difference between Beijing and Shanghai is analogous to the difference between New York and Miami. The cultural center, the contemporary art world of today's China is based in Beijing, but Shanghai is giving it a run for its money. It's a rich international city that's characterized by transience, and by the influx of capital, ideas, and art objects. So while I was there, I started, I had a resume to begin with, which most people in Shanghai at that point didn't have. And I gave my resume to an English language listings magazine, kind of like Time Out, but like a step below Time Out. And I started working for them. I ended up moving and covering the art beat. So every 2 weeks I would write a terrible, and I'm really happy that these things aren't available online, but over the 2 years that I was there, these review columns would get decreasingly incompetent. And so on the strength of that, I started working for different people while I was over there. So Shanghai does have a lot of really interesting galleries. This is the expansion of the James Cohen Gallery. They actually have an opening tonight over in Chelsea. So I thank you all for coming here and not there. But I bring this slide up because they had the show of Alex Katz, and there was really no one writing about it. And so the director of James Cohen calls me and he's like, hey, do you want to interview Alex Katz? And I'm just, like 23 years old. Like, I know who Alex Katz is because I took art history in high school, but beyond that, like, completely unprepared for this. Sure, okay, I'll do it. It's a 12-hour time difference between New York and Shanghai, meaning when Alex Katz's assistant said, yeah, call him at noon, I have to stay up till midnight to do it. Alex completely forgets about the interview. I call him, he's really angry that just some random guy from China is calling him, but he warmed up. We chatted for about an hour, and that interview was published on a blog that I had started working for called Bound Editorial, which was edited by Leslie Kuo, who is here tonight. Another reason I bring up the James Cohen Gallery is because it was where people showed up. In New York, there are so many galleries that you're probably going to bump into familiar faces at an opening, but in Shanghai, it's like every single person in the room, every single person in line waiting for them to sort of try and open this bottle of really terrible Prosecco. And I was waiting next to a gallerist who actually graduated from this school several years ago, and bemoaning the fact that none of these New York publications wanted me to work for them because I had just worked for all these Chinese publications, and how was I going to bridge that gap? And he's like, listen, I can't write for Art in America. I can't write for Artforum anymore because I'm running this gallery, so I'll just email them for you. I know this is the advice that no one wants to hear, but sometimes it is just sort of being in line with somebody or being stuck in traffic with somebody like Levi and I were for 3 days last fall. So 2 years later, I move again. All my friends come to New York. I go to Miami. Somewhat with a bit of resentment, you know. No one ever really wants to hear, like, and then I moved to Florida, you know, before you're 75 years old. Because I had heard everything, I had heard basically what people hear about Miami, what you all hear about Miami, I'm sure. I got there and it wasn't like that at all. It's a fascinatingly dense, rich text of a city. I'm not going to be a tour guide today. I can after the talk if you want to. It's a place with 7 major museums. This is the Herzog and Dimmeron designed PAM, opened up in 2012 or 13. Whatever. Beyond that, there's a lot more. There's also a series of private collections. I say private because they're run by private families, billionaires, all of them, but they are very much public. I mean, they're open to the public. This is the De La Cruz collection. You see the Felix Gonzalez Torres in the foreground. The Marty Margulies collection, the Ernesto Netta. The Rebel family collection. I like the outside of this building more than the inside because it sort of gives more away. This is a former DEA warehouse, and so when they moved in, they were just sort of sweeping up just the residue of the drug war. Whatever was cataloged, but cataloged poorly, so it ended up in the closets and on the floors. That's what they had to move out in order to move in the contemporary art, and I think that connection, while accidental, is quite revealing to the fabric of the place. In addition to those collections, there are alternative art spaces, such as locust projects. This is not their current space, but for this one, Ruben Ochoa excavated the floor and he elevated these concrete slabs on these metal stems, you know, for lack of a better word. There is, of course, 1 week in December where everyone sort of descends upon it and, you know, brings their assumptions of the place back to whatever the city they come from. There are galleries there that operate year-round. One of them would be Gallery Diet. This show is by Nicholas Lobo. He's an artist, a writer. I mean, I've worked with him in both senses. These are these beautiful, I think, scholar stones, which are made out of napalm. When you mix gasoline and styrofoam, the chemical reaction is similar to napalm. And they are displayed within the sea of discontinued aphrodisiac energy drink. So it's just kind of an example of one of the practices which is occurring down there. The Michael John Gallery. This is a JPW3 show. This is up in Chelsea right now. A similar show. The install's not quite as impressive, but, you know, whatever. There are art districts, and they sort of revolve around each other. One's hot one year, the next one's hot. The next year, this is Wynwood, which is sort of collapsed into this. I think I pulled this from my Instagram or someone's Instagram. You can tell by the composition of the image and the slight vignetting, and that's what Wynwood really is. It's basically a backdrop for Instagram at this point. But there are other neighborhoods which are coming up. There's all of this, and there was no year-round response to it. So I came and I started a blog, and the blog involved some writings and some interviews and some artist designed web pages, and, you know, it did its thing. You know, it had its run for a couple months, and it stopped because I was asked to launch the Miami Rail, which is why I'm here tonight. Oh, I skipped a slide. So basically, the only response to Miami is this sort of, I don't want to say, this one note sort of New York Times travel guide thing where it's like, okay, well, you know, go to the spa, but then you can go and chase gators afterwards, which is the case. You can definitely do those things, but it's not the only thing to do. So, switch gears. We have the Brooklyn Rail. The publisher of this, the owner of this gallery is also the publisher of the Rail. We'll talk about conflict of interest later in the evening. She did a show with a New York painter who is connected to the Brooklyn Rail. As part of the programming, Fong, the publisher of the Brooklyn Rail, came down and gave a talk at Lester's. Went through why it started, what needs it was addressing, basically the lack of coverage in Brooklyn, and yeah, just sort of did the whole spiel. At the end, he jokes, maybe one day there will be a Miami rail. And I guess that's the first thing to glean from this conversation, that you should probably, take jokes seriously or laugh at serious statements, because the publisher or the future publisher was like, okay, cool. So she secured seed money from the Knight Foundation, just analogous to the Warhol Foundation or one of these lending institutions, or that's a bank, one of these grant-giving institutions. And we asked for 40 grand to start this thing. They gave us a little bit more than 20, and we made it work. I'm going to get back to this in a bit. You all probably know the story of the Brooklyn Rail, right? No. Okay, so I sort of tossed that to the crowd because I don't really want to misspeak, especially when I'm being recorded. But it's my understanding that it began in Brooklyn around, in the first iteration around the late 90s. And it was printed originally as maybe a single piece of paper, which was folded and distributed at the subway stop in Williamsburg. The idea being that it could be read in the time that it takes the train to get across the river and, arrive in Manhattan. And then, idealistically, it could be handed off to another writer who's going back. So that's sort of responds to the early form of the Brooklyn Rail. There it is. The problem with that is we don't have trains in Miami. We do. We actually have two. We have one that goes north-south sometimes, and we have this sort of little roller coaster doodad that goes around downtown. But people don't take them. People drive, or they sort of wave goodbye from the top deck of a cruise ship, or they bike, or they lay on the beach. That's where people read in Miami. And so we had to come up with a publication which reflected that. I mean, people get a lot of reading done in New York City, a lot more reading done than they do in the rest of the country. So we thought about it, and we came up with something that somewhat reflected the history of Miami. Miami has a strong tradition of representation in genre fiction. Detective stories, Carl Hyacin, Dave Barry, that book about the dog, the golden retriever, Marley and Me, that's a Miami story as well. So it's a big genre town. And so in order to sort of reflect upon this, we started publishing on Pulp, really rough newsprint. This is the first issue. And after we can sort of pass this around, my hands, 2 years later, my hands are still coming away with ink. That just shows just how poorly it was published. On purpose, right? It's all a style choice. Because the other thing that Miami is known for is just really overdone glitz, gloss. Magazine pages where there's just more gloss than actually print. And so this, too, was a response to that. We didn't even have staples. I like to think that we could afford them, but perhaps it's more romantic if I said that we couldn't afford staples, but for whatever reason, the early issues didn't have staples. So this launched in 2012. The first couple weeks were nail biting and teeth grinding. It's a quarterly publication. But we had a month to do the first issue because that's when the grant money came in, and we really wanted to nail June 1st so that we could nail September 1st so that we could nail Art Basel December 1st. And so May 2012 was just a gnarly time. And we should probably talk afterwards about just the stress of doing this. Kind of grinded the enamel off my molars. Luckily, we had a dental plan. We didn't have a dental plan. About 70% of it was contemporary art running through. We borrowed some of the rails sections. We had a local section, and then we had an express section, the trains, the rail, you get it. And then we moved into visual art. We did contemporary art. We did literature, specifically poetry. We always had a poet. And then reviews, and then a book review we would throw in for good measure. It was tricky, though, when establishing editorial voice and presence because we didn't have the luxury of competition. It's not like we could carve out a niche. We kind of had to do everything at the same time, and we had to do it not well, but passably well, like okay. And so if you pick up an issue or if you browse through the website, you're going to see things written by academics. You're going to see things written by teenagers. One of my favorite pieces 3 issues ago is called Until the Marrow Spills. It's an oral history of Miami's oldest motorcycle shop told by the scion and an artist in town. His name's Justin Long. Basically just talking about motorcycle injuries for 2,500 words. And I think it's probably the most compelling journalism that I've sort of, I've shepherded into the world. So moving forward, like I want to stress just how vexing establishing a voice and sticking to that voice is. But sometimes if you don't stick to it, you know, things can get kind of exciting. If you want to start a magazine, the first thing is why. You know, why would you ever want to do this? And like everyone wants to start a magazine. There's this sort of like narcissistic cloud which just floods through the rooms of every 15-year-old in the country. But if that cloud remains, you know, perhaps you should start thinking of it in different terms. I would say that you would start a publication, and I use magazine and publication and text interchangeably, although I'm sure they're not interchangeable terms. We had a clear-cut reason. There was no coverage in Miami. That's the case in most cities. In most cultural contexts, there is no sustainable and sustained commentary or critique, and that's why we did it there, and that's why people should be doing this all over the place. That's not to say that new publications shouldn't sprout up in New York City. Anything, really, but I would just really try and you know, figure out why it is first, because it's going to be difficult, and if it is, well, it's not going to be that difficult if it's necessary because people are going to help you. And as far as funding goes, people do help if it is necessary. If it's not necessary, I would suggest just working your way up through one of the tried and true avenues, you know, one of the big publications. I mean, they're tried and true for a reason. They are institutions for a reason. But you know, those nights after grinding all the enamel off your teeth, where you're not sleeping, you've lost a ton of weight, and you're really wondering like, why on earth you're doing this, and then you get a call from a local university and they want to archive all of your papers, like that kind of redeems the entire effort. And that's one reason why you should maybe print the thing as well, because you can't, it's much easier to archive something that you can put in a box. So as far as why, once one has established why, I would say figure out a mission statement. This is all kind of very easy territory. You know, the mission statement will help you as you grow, because you will have pieces that come along that you really like as an editor, but if they don't fit, then they don't fit. And then you have this sort of this sustained voice, which stretches from issue to issue to issue. As far as form goes, we struggled in the early days with getting grants because people assumed that print was dead. I mean, I don't know if you guys know, but Miami doesn't really have a strong historical tradition. People are always looking for the next best thing, and so it's really difficult to go to an organization and say, we want to use newsprint in 2014 to do this. They're going to laugh at you. They're going to say, have you heard of Tumblr? You know, have you heard of Triple Canopy? You should do this. You know, it's cheaper. But while those models work in certain contexts, they don't in other contexts. In Miami, there was no community. There were no bookstores. I'm going to go on record saying this, that within the city limits of Miami, now Miami Beach is a different city, Coral Gables is a different city, but within the city limits of Miami, the only major bookstore is in the departures terminal of Miami International Airport. And you can check that out. I'm pretty sure it's the case. And so in that scarcity of the written material, bringing another stack of dead trees into the world actually does have, it does have a point. So, but yeah, I would definitely, if one was thinking of doing this, I would definitely focus on figuring out the form early on. We published quarterly, but we also did we also have a website, which I'll show you all in a second. The first issue was 32 pages, and then as we grew, the content, I would like to say, got better because we kind of figured out what we were doing, but it also it got much bigger. And so the last issue, which I did, which now does have staples and it has ads on the inside, was 86 pages. So you have that steady growth. The growth took 2 years though, and hopefully it will continue and it won't drop off. We always tried to go up or stay the same. You don't really want to expand too quickly. Another way we could grow would be to go bi-monthly, and that would be more difficult because there's less content in Miami. That's another thing. You don't really have that much happening in the present moment to write about. We talked about going bi-monthly, especially because we couldn't fulfill all of the needs of the community having a quarterly publication. One of these needs was the lack of gallery reviews. You have a gallery show which is up for 6 weeks, a month, 2 months. If you publish January 1st and that show goes up January 1st, it's going to be gone before you publish the next time, and so you don't really have the page count to continually write about all of these shows. So we started experimenting with that. We launched an online review column called 52 Reviews, where I very stupidly took it upon myself to write a review every week, which felt like boot camp. And I definitely saw that my writing was getting better still, but that was a very brief climb and then a long decline as the months went on, because it gets quite difficult. But that's just one example of how there are limitations and there are strengths to these forms. All right, so this is George Sanchez Calderon. He's a local artist. I use that term to describe the fact that he lived in Miami for many years and he made art there. Although within cities that are not New York or London, local artists smacks of parochialism, and thus many people sort of balk at it. He's an artist based in Miami. The next person, though, on issue 2 is Bill Viola, though. And basically, the reason we had him on the issue 2 is because I interviewed him. And this was really interesting. This is what separated the Miami Rail from other regional publications, because Miami does have an infrastructure of contemporary art. We have institutions who are bringing artists down. And so over the course of my run, we interviewed a lot of the very influential, very recognizable names, both from this country and from abroad. Another thing that we did to sort of tighten the connection between Miami, which is, well, it's at the end of a giant peninsula, with the rest of the world, to sort of bring it back into the center, is the visiting writer program. So we realized that we needed to have new people coming down, and so we made it a priority every month or every issue to bring down a writer who was established in their own way. Showed them Miami, we showed Miami to them, and then we asked them to write a piece for us. So Levi came down. We've had in the past, Patty Johnson was just down there, Coco Fusco, John Minnick. We had Jeff Dyer came down. He wrote some stuff for us. There's a bunch of different names. That's just a section that we have. As far as the, let me actually. And so this is the website. Basically, it's archived. Everything is available. You can print it out on PDF, and it's organized based by issue. And it's all there. I mean, we're writing about Rita Ackerman, but we're also writing about Yanni, because we have to write about everything, and because it's fun to write about Yanni. One thing that's interesting too, I saw Christy Gast's name. Christy Gast is a Miami artist. Well, no, she's not. She moved to Chinatown. She's a New York artist. She's an artist now. She's also a writer. She's a grant writer. She does a lot of wonderful things for the publication and the family. She did a show in 2012. It was reviewed in the Rail. She did another show in 2014, and it was reviewed in the Rail. Now, at this point, we've become we're way too flimsy to be an institution. We're very spry and flexible, but we've been around long enough that we've seen artists progress, and so the value of the rail, not just as a forum but as an archive, really has become clear. You see what happened with the last show, and you see what happened with this show. And if you have the stack of magazines, you can flip it out and put it on your desk. If you have the website, it's all right there. So I was asked to edit the thing because I had the clips from China and because I was working for some New York websites at the time, and it fell upon me to really establish the editorial voice, to see what we were going to publish and how we were going to do it. I just wanted to try. I mean, I killed myself the first issues trying to just hammer all of the writers into just one sound voice, and that was very much a mistake. Once I relaxed a bit, the publication became much more lively. It supported many different voices and many different tones, and I think that's what makes it quite interesting. One of the things, though, that I established early on was that I didn't really want to have boring art writing. I'm sure you all have discussed that within this program, and also just out in your life. This strange fact that a lot of art writing, especially, can be boring. But how does one define that? I asked that question to a group of artists and writers at a similar talk I did last year. And this hand shot up, and it was a really smart hand that had just graduated from Goldsmiths. And I'm like, shit. And she's like, immediately, like, why does art writing have to subscribe to this logic of entertainment? I'm like, you're right, it doesn't. It doesn't. It shouldn't be a tabloid. But perhaps there's a middle ground, and that's what we've really tried to strive for. Again, going back to establishing a form and establishing a tone that matches the audience, because a publication, while it might be archived and while it might be rediscovered and assigned historical worth 100 years down the line, I would wager that a publication is really important only if people are reading it, and so you need to get readers. And so in order to do that, you need to just navigate a path whereby you don't isolate or you don't alienate the readers, and you expand their ideas of what writing is and what art is little by little by little. Miami, that's been very, very easy because the ideas when we began were quite narrow. So the expansion has been it's been a cinch. That essay I sent out, I don't know if anyone actually read it. If you did, fantastic. I've been working as a writer on this sort of speculative study linking the writing, the dystopic worldview of J.G. Ballard with this sort of fun in the sun tropical paradise of Miami. And when you start to compare the two, it makes a lot of sense. I bring it up because I had to import a model, I had to import words, but at the same time they had to click. And so I think that gets back to what I was talking about with no, it doesn't actually. Okay. Funding. We pay, which I insisted on. I mean, I was a writer first, and I was a writer after being an editor, so it was important to me that there was some sort of financial reward at the end of the day for the writers. It's a pittance, but it's something. In order to pay, you have to have money coming in. We began with seed money. That dried up real quick, as it is apt to do, and so we started selling advertisements. We couldn't really be that picky with the ads. We weren't advertising. I mean, it wasn't, Pollo Tropical wasn't in there, but it wasn't just like only galleries and maybe fashion like our forum would do, right? So we have galleries, we have institutional ads, but we also have condos, which is perverse, but it also is quite of Miami, especially when the condo has hired Julian Schnabel to actually do their ads for them. So it all kind of comes together. Single source funding dries up. I would definitely say, diversify. As far as that goes, you would need to learn how to write grants or hire a grant writer. And you would also perhaps hire a person that can sell ads. I can do neither, so I I think wisely, delegated responsibility to the experts in the field. As an editor, I mean, the masthead, you can see it, it's minuscule. It's a publisher, it's an editor, it's a couple people. I mean, you don't have different levels of editorial. And so you source, you do the big edits, you do the little edits, you proofread. That takes up a lot of time, but it's wonderful to sort of like have this, maternal or paternal view of the publication coming into fruition. It also leads to a lot of typos. So, yeah, the typos. I'm not even going to talk about typos that much because it just drives me insane. But they're there, and they represent several different things. I mean, I think they represent true internationalism, the fact that many of these writers are writing English as a sixth language. It also represents the fact that you can't do it all by yourself. You have to have someone else at the end of the road who prints it out and reads it backwards or does whatever they have to do. And so while I would like to stand up here and say that I did this, I did that, I did this, and I did that, I mean, it really does come down to the necessity of a community, of a group of like-minded people putting it all together. Efficiency was such a thing to learn. I mean, as far as creating a schedule and sticking to it, like I can proudly say that, under my tenure of 11 issues, like we never blew a deadline, like everything was printed on schedule. But had I really gotten into sort of managerial skills early on, I wouldn't have lost so much sleep. Creating a style guide is, can't be overstressed. I mean, it's so important to have a style guide early on because you're going to spend 30 seconds here wondering if it's arts scene or art scene, and you're going to spend 45 seconds there, and then that adds up into minutes, into hours, into seemingly months of your life. And when you're on a deadline, that's a nightmare. So that's some tips on that. Distribution is was a big problem. It's really tricky. How does a small publication find the distribution that it needs? Because again, you need people to read this thing. So we would distribute at galleries, at museums, at institutions, universities, some shops around town. We also had a mailing list, and we also sent boxes out to different cities. This costs money, and this takes time, but it's one of those messy things that needs to occur. The reason that we worked with Julian Schnabel is because he was working with Craig Robbins, who is a developer and a collector in town. The reason we worked with Bill Viola is because he's a friend of Bonnie Clearwater, who was the director of a museum. The reason, and I can go on and on and on and on, I'm just bringing up all of these connections to illustrate the sort of just how amazingly lucky I was that Miami has a close-knit cultural community, but also the fact that it's imperative that one successfully navigate that community by being flexible, by honoring commitments, and by generally being a nice person. The success of a publication is marked by how well you can deal with other people and their desires and their timelines and their psychoses, and they have those. There is much more experience that I can impart this evening, and I really leave it up to you all to bring this out in the very vibrant and lengthy Q&A, which is going to begin at this moment. So thank you again for everyone coming out. Thank you so much for putting this on. There's just so much to talk about, and I'm really excited about talking about it with you all. So, like printing costs. You've got an essay, you've got an article, you've got an interview that you want to run, like that costs more, because it adds pages to the book, and it seems like such a minuscule thing, just another page of really bad paper, but yeah, it adds money to it. So, and we offset those costs via, again, the grants, the advertising dollars. And we recently became a 501c3. Basically for my tenure, we weren't a 501c3. I don't know why, but we weren't. So yeah, and that money went to paying staff. I made probably, minimum wage doing this. The publisher made a third of minimum wage. The designers get paid a lot of money. She made a good amount, and writers as well. And so the money breaks down with that between, or at least it did with at my time, between like $75 for a review up to like $300 for a longer essay that usually capped out about 2,500 words. I'm still making minimum wage. You just do different things. You do a million different things to feed, I don't want to say the practice of being a writer, but to feed this experience of working in this world. You know, you work within the world, but you also work outside it. So the first year or so, I was teaching English to tourists in South Beach, which, you know, if you're sort of parsing art speak, to have, you know, some woman from Kiev attempt to just address you in the present perfect, it was a very strange but also a really funny experience. So yeah, teaching English. I worked for many different institutions, and this gets into the conflict of interest thing. As an editor of the only critical thing in Miami, should I have been doing these other things? No, of course not, definitely not. But like, it's the real world, you know. You have to be flexible. You have to play ball. And so I was doing. I would do talks. I would do lectures. I would moderate panels. I taught a journalism class at one of the museums for high school students. I also wrote for a lot of different publications that were paying a little bit more. Lifestyle publications pay phenomenally well, and I would really suggest that because it's a different type of art speak. So yeah, just a rotating platter of gigs, really. And I think that's the truth for most people in the industry. I mean, what's the Dylan quote? You know, when living in a financially deregulated and incestuous world, you must remain honest. I mean, I think it's just, I mean, you have to do it piece by piece, and you have to kind of cut through the fluff. And really sort of see where things are slipping. Luckily, the scale of my community, I could see that because I knew all of the practices. I don't think that would be possible in New York City. But then again, in New York City, you wouldn't have to have those conflict of interest because there are more than 3 art writers in town. You know, there's more than 20 artists in town. I did it by just like article by article, really just focusing on what was true in my best judgment towards the art and towards the artist and, you know, towards the context. But yeah, I mean, just by being as honest as I possibly could be, I think. It's an infrastructural challenge, but it's the very fabric of reality. I mean, Miami is a snarled 20th century city based upon the logic of the automobile that is sinking. And it's something that I think the artist will probably have to think about, but like, you know, the government probably needs to think about a bit more. As far as like there not being a connection between Wynwood, which is this historically working class Puerto Rican neighborhood that sort of came up in the past 15 years as a gallery district and now is a quite hip neighborhood, and Coral Gables, which is this very Tony planned community from the 20th century. Yeah, it's difficult to get there between the two, even though it's a 15-minute drive, or it should be a 15-minute drive.
I mean, gallery areas died. In 1970, when part of my family moved down there, the gallery district was Bay Harbor Islands. There are no galleries to speak of Bay Harbor Islands anymore. You know, Cristo wrapped some islands in the Bay. That was Bay Harbor Islands. But it disappeared. It then moved to Coral Gables.
And it disappeared from Gables, and then it moved to South Beach, and then it disappeared from South Beach, and then it moved to Wynwood, and then to downtown, and then now to Little Haiti. What's happening though, because there's no clear connection, I think perversely you have these amazingly pure pockets of art and aesthetic sensibility. Like the scene in South Beach was super campy. I mean, it was super performative. It didn't have anything to do with the scene in Wynwood, and that's because those are two very different places. Coral Gables and Wynwood are different cities. I mean, they are actually. Coral Gables is its own city, but it's a different world. And so I think that's kind of interesting, actually, the fact that these are so closed off, even though they're not. Miami is an extremely ghettoized place, and that could be viewed as a challenge. Also, it could be viewed as I don't know, something to work with. As far as sustaining gallery districts, they die because of their own popularity, because it's such a bubble town. I lived downtown and I rode a bicycle, which actually you can get anywhere in Miami on a bicycle quicker than you can in a car. But no, distributing it was a pain because you would have to drive the things. But no, from Palm Beach is an hour and a half away, but the Norton's a fantastic museum. Down through the Landon Foundation used to be in Lake Worth, which is a little bit further south. Fort Lauderdale's coming back. North Miami, down Little Haiti, downtown. Like it's almost a continuous thing. I mean, it's a pain to drive. But, it's a pain to drive to the grocery store.
To get to in a way. I mean,
They are.
you
But
go to one neighborhood, there's one or two galleries, but it's not quite enough to fill out your afternoon of gallery going.
yeah, but how long does it take you to get, to take the train from Brooklyn to Manhattan? Because it's the same distance. I mean, it's the same amount of time. There's just more to see in Chelsea.
Or once you get to Chelsea, there's a lot.
That's not structurally, that's scale. I mean, there's simply more in New York. But no, I completely agree that needs to be addressed. I just realized that, perhaps, if you look at publications which are known for, really having a unified voice, sometimes they're not the most interesting ones. And for me, that unified voice was synonymous with my idea of quality. It's got to be this great creative nonfiction. It's got to it's the smack of, X writer. And I would sort of, pillory these writers. Not pillory, but I would work with them through many drafts to sort of achieve what I thought was going to be a successful piece. And then after a couple, not ferocious email exchanges, but a couple very time-consuming issues, I was like, why don't I just see what happens if I edit it, but if I don't really try and take over the piece? Another thing is I stopped listening to my graphic designer. If you notice, it got bigger because we had more content, and we figured out what we were doing. We had more money, but it also got bigger because we stopped listening to the graphic designer who was like, you need to cut this down to 800 words, because I realized that I shouldn't listen to her, even though, she knew what she was doing. But I think the voice of the publication changed at that point too. The writing sort of stepped up, and it became less of an object and more of a series of articles, of different voices. Look, I try to take my politics out because I wasn't a local. I kind of knew what was happening, and it does have somewhat of a political bent, but I think it is much less political than the Brooklyn Rail, at least. With this one, the inset is just a field guide. We've started doing these field guides, and this one has all of these local, not writers even, but just people writing about Art Basel. And so we have this piece by Manny Hernandez, who's I don't want to say he's paparazzi, but he's an event photographer, and he's just writing about Kim Kardashian, and it's what you think it would be. It's not Paper Monument or whatever, but it is what it is, and that's part of Miami. And it's so towards the end, I was like, we have a responsibility, I think, to try and include this, at least as a specimen of what the city was at this specific point in time. I had good friends that I didn't write about, because I didn't really think that the work that they were doing was important to what I was doing at that moment. The friendship, the relationship thing really it gets tricky. It really does, and it's difficult to separate. And it gets difficult to separate personal relationships and happy hour friendships, or deep friendships with actual I'm gonna write this review about you and it's not gonna be pleasant. But I don't think that's a new situation, and I don't think that's one that was invented in Miami, or is Miami specific today. There's a gallery down there, and they're the sweetest people in the world, and I have just destroyed their shows because I think their shows suck. But I really, really like them. And we hang out, and they get kind of mad at me, but it's what you have to do. And I think that goes back to what I was speaking of earlier with that at least attempting to be honest, attempting to realize all of the facets. Of course, it's impossible, but just trying and putting your best foot forward with that. Unless it becomes state-run propaganda, I don't see that there's a problem within that. I think that could be easily abused, but I don't think that that's I don't know, a gift horse that should be really looked in the mouth. You know what I mean? Like, I think if an institution wants to step up and buy ad space, and they have content that is worthwhile, then we're going to write about them. Not because they bought ad space, but because they have content that's worthwhile. But usually, the museums that have content that are worthwhile are the ones that have the budget to buy ad space as well. As being a distinct arm of the institution, I mean, that's another thing. But again, like, I don't think that's inherently problematic. But I'm being quite pragmatic because you really have to scrounge for money. The reception has been, I mean, it was, I don't think I got as many hits on my website that I wanted to get, but it definitely immediately naturalized itself within the cultural community. It was immediately taken in. It was read. It was everywhere. Writers were contacting us. Directors of museums were contacting us to write. Yeah, I mean, it was strange that it hadn't been done before because it was very easy to do. I mean, there was a point where it was like, okay, like, what's happening to the momentum? We had a lot of momentum when we started, and then, like, around issue 3 or something, it was like, okay, well, where's all the grant money that's supposed to come in? And that's when we started selling ads, So I think that it was it is positively received. Partner. I mean, there's a million different ways that you can qualify that, but I think at the end of the day, people talking about it, people asking us to write things, not about shows that are happening, but about like specific moments in Miami history, and that's another thing that we do. I mean, we really publish. The bulk of our page count goes to contemporary art, but a lot of it goes to sort of excavating just weird, forgotten moments of that place, and that's some of the most important stuff, I think, as well. So people like it for different reasons as well. I mean, we've got the History Museum loves us, and they don't do art at all. So yeah, 7,500 are printed. Of those, and these could be old figures, of those about 1,500 are mailed out, and the others are distributed in boxes of 50 to 100 at different places. Of course, distributed is a term that's being used very lightly because usually it's dropped and scattered to the wind, I think. But that's what happens with a lot of free publications, and we are free, and that's a big thing. That we wanted to be free, and we wanted to pay the writers. So Basel and Miami go hand in hand, like they are inseparable, and the financial and cultural realities that make that fair so popular are the ones that make Miami so popular or so unpopular. And so there's a degree of truth there. But on the other hand, everyone's just kind of like, you guys are really missing out. Like, there's so much stuff happening year round. Not stuff that's that different from the art fair. I mean, if you want to see like lavish consumption, if you want to see chrome Lamborghinis, just go to a Wendy's in Miami. If you want to see. So there's that exists year round, but there's also like. There's just so much. I mean, there's like the International Noise Conference is there, and so there's a lot of sound art that's been happening, for the past 25 years. Tom Wolfe, when he wrote his last book, he said Miami is the city, the American city that saw the future first. The city has been destroyed by race riots. To this day, it's extremely racially tense. It's the richest and the poorest city in the United States, basically. It's drowning, and Sam Cooke recorded his live album there in Overtown, which was basically Harlem of the South until the federal government put the highway right through it. I mean, so there's all of these very important things that tie the story of Miami to the story of the rest of the country and, to this, the global moment. So, I mean, when people just focus on the fair, it's like, okay, well, you got some of it, but you need to get more of it. And that's what we've really been trying to do, to sort of tease out the rest. So I would be lying if I said that I really liked doing this. I mean, there's like a huge amount of anxiety, and it's really hard work, and it is rewarding, and it's wonderful, but at the same time, it really sort of kicks you in the teeth a lot. And so there are times where it's like, what if it just stopped? What if everything just stopped? What if art disappeared? Like, I feel like a lot of people have thought that. I was talking to Sylvie Fortin, who she ran art papers for a while, and now she runs the Montreal Biennial. And we had coffee down there, and she's like, I was talking about the future. What do you think we should do for 2 or 3 years down the line? Should we be a monthly? Maybe we could be perfect bound or something. And she's like, listen, most magazines fail after 2 years. And I was like, oh, because this was like a year in, but there was this almost this relief. And what I took from that was that you can't really focus on the future, that you really have to just put out the best thing you can, issue after issue. I mean, you really have to just want it to go away after you're done. You want to be so exhausted with it that that you need a couple weeks off before you start the next one, because that's, I think, a way of ensuring that you're doing the most work that you can. You're doing the best work that you can, at least in my experience. But as far as specific goals, I would like Miami to grow to a point where it could be a monthly. And then if Miami did that, then the rail would catch up just instantly. If there were enough shows, if there was enough going on, if there were enough writers, if there were enough artists down there, if you're writers or artists, Miami's a really cool place to live. No, seriously, it is. It really is. Everyone down there, it's like the quality of the light. So yeah, I mean, a monthly would be fantastic, I think. And at that point, a lot of these questions of truly covering the art world, of all of the shows, would go away. Also expanding programming. We partnered with PAM, the Perez Art Museum, to do this reading art program where we reached out to writers who had written fiction or nonfiction that somehow tangentially connected to PAM programming. We brought them down and they gave a talk and all that stuff. We had a book club as well. That's why Jeff Dyer came down, because there is this salon-style photo show that was sort of similar to his methodology in The Ongoing Moment. We did more things like that. I mean, really truly exhausting that place, which is impossible because honestly it is, as are all places, inexhaustible. But a monthly. I mean, it's just like the graffiti on, the columns of Atlantis. I think Miami really sums up a lot of what's happening in the world at this moment, and we're writing about it in a way that no one else is. And so hopefully that will be, that people will look at it a little bit down the line. But I mean, smaller scale, the legacy, I think, exists in the people that we're working with. I mean, we make a point to try and work with established writers, but also to publish kids who are still in undergrad, who are really sort of trying to break into the world, to just rip them apart. Not to rip them apart, but be like, okay, well, this is how you're going to write a review, and we're going to work on this until it's really good and you're proud of it, and I'm proud of it. I published... she was a high school junior. She was a very gifted high school junior, and she wrote a fine review after a lot of work. But that whole creating a community as well, I think, will be a legacy of it as well. As far as the physical archive, it's in special collections at the University of Miami, in a cardboard box in a hurricane-safe building. It's like the last scene of Raiders of the Lost Ark, except there are parrots outside. And it's online as well. So it can be accessed by anyone at any time and any place. Well, thank you again so much for listening to me. And that's